And so welcome again. As I said, my name is Eileen Sevier. I run strategy and marketing for Early Mountain Vineyards. And so pleased to be hosting this April shipment tasting of the Taste of Virginia wines. We'll just start with a brief intro from each of the winemakers and then get right into the tasting. So Maya, jump right in.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maya Hood-White. I am the associate winemaker and viticulturalist at Early Mountain. So I did basically the first and the last wine you're going to try today.
Joy.
Hi, my name is Joy Ting. My day job is as the research enologist for the Winemakers Research Exchange, and then I make a little bit of wine on the side. One of those is the Mes Amis Chardonnay that we'll be tasting today.
Rachel.
Hi, Rachel Stinson-Vroman, co-winemaker along with my husband Nathan Vroman at Stinson Vineyards, and also director of operations and anything that anyone doesn't want to do.
Maybe not what we would have predicted on the right.
And Matthew.
So I'm Mathieu Finot. I'm winemaker at King Family Vineyards, but also having fun on the side with a small vineyard that's called Turk Mountain Vineyard, and I'm making some wine out of it.
Listening to the Early Mountain thing for a while.
That's called Domaine Finot. And
U.S. population is just about all of the adults and adolescents. So the bar is going to be high. We're going to have an.
Sorry about that.
We're just watching the news over here. We can't kill two birds with one stone. I think it's our turn. I'm gonna go. My name is Nate Walsh, and this is Sarah Walsh. We have Walsh Family Wine, which is located in Northern Virginia, where we farm a number of vineyard sites and make wine.
Awesome. And Matthew, I don't know if everyone was able to hear you. Do you want to just go once
it doesn't
more?
matter. I was speaking with a French accent anyway, nobody will understand. So I'm Mathieu Finot, and I'm making wine for the Domaine Finot. That's very inventive as a name. Anyway, it's just with the Turk Mountain Vineyard. It's in Central Virginia. I'm taking care of a vineyard on the side, so just for fun.
All right, well, awesome. So let's get right into our first wine, which is a Pet Nat from Early Mountain. It's a very aromatic white blend. I'm guessing it might be one of the first wines that you all opened out there. And for those of you who have tried any of these wines, please jump in and share your feedback on them as well. But Maya, if you want to start just with a very brief overview of Pet Nat, the style, and how we started making it at Early Mountain and why there's so little of it.
So we started making Pet Nat in 2014. And so just as a quick overview of what Pet Nat is, it's a sparkling wine made in the Method Ancestral made in Method Ancestral. So it predates Method Champenois as far as a sparkling method. So what you're doing is you are putting still fermenting must, so juice that's still undergoing its primary fermentation, in a bottle and closing it and trapping the remaining CO2 in there. And so, I love sparkling wine. And when I first got to Early Mountain in 2014, I wanted to try making a little bit. And the goal was to maybe use this just as a thank you for everyone who comes and helps during harvest and, help sort fruit, pick with us. And slowly, as of, since then, it's gotten out of hand as far as production. So we've increased our production each year, and now I guess we're up to 150 cases, and we do a white and a red. We used to do rosé, and that kind of like fluctuates back and forth. Usually we do, at this point, we're doing 2 out of the 3. So in 2018, we started using Malvasia Bianca. We planted that in 15, and it's we kind of stumbled upon it because there is, in 2017, I think I way overshot the crop projection on that. So I was completely off base, tried to make Pet Nat with it in 17 and missed the bottling. So with Pet Nat, you have to bottle at a very specific time. So it has a very specific sugar content. So you don't, get no bubbles or get way too many and explode your bottle. So in 18, we started with the Malvasia, and we found that it was actually a really good fit because up until then, we had been using different varietals to try it out. So yeah, it's a lower alcohol wine, so it's just under 10%. I think it's like 9.8. It's pretty aromatic. The grape itself is incredibly aromatic, so it almost has that like potpourri kind of character to it. It has really thick skin, and it's a huge cluster. So like an average size, you know, like if you think of Chardonnay, it's usually around this big. The Malvasia Bianca is like that big, so it's ginormous. Really high pectin, so you end up maintaining a little bit more high pectin and protein, so you can retain a little bit more CO2 in the wine too, which I think fits pretty well, especially because it's turbid. So what you're seeing is disgorged, but it's not like riddled and disgorged as you would think of a you know, more traditional sparkling wine. So you get a lot of that turbidity, and so with that you have more nucleation points in the wine, so you can lose CO2, but because we have higher protein in the Malvasia, I think it really helps retain some of the CO2 in there too. So it's, I mean, it's just meant to be like an easy drinking, like something fun, not high alcohol, and you know, just something to have fun with. So
Awesome. So folks, jump in with any questions. I guess, you know, what I heard was a really aromatic white, a white that helps hold the bubbles because of the high protein content, the thickness of the skins. And it's a grape that we've now used in Pet Nat a few years in a row because we really love how that combination of bubbles and aromatics works together. I think there's a question. What is the bit of brown ring in the bottle?
oh, okay. So that is actually lees and tartrates. So this wine is pretty low intervention. So there's, you know, there's some yeast left in it. And then there's also wines will naturally throw tartrates. So when they're not cold stabilized. So we chill this down. So when we disgorge it, we essentially shake bottle, you know, turn it upside down and try to get most of the lees into the neck. And then we pop it open and we keep it cold to try to maintain some CO2. But because we're chilling it and it's a not stabilized wine, so stabilized wines meaning, you know, you can stabilize for protein, you can stabilize for cold. So we have tartrates that form, and that's where if you ever see crystals. So some of those don't make it out of the bottle when we disgorge, so they're just left in there. They can also kind of act as nucleation points. They're not harmful. It's essentially, you know, tartaric acid for the most part. Yeah, so it looks a little weird. Some vintages seem to be more cold stable than others. I think last year was fairly cold stable, but this year when I noticed as we were taking it out of the fridge had, you know, a little bit more of those tartrate rings. So sometimes it's funny, you like some were forming right around the neck, so you get a small ring, some were forming around the base, like when we threw them in the barrel room to chill down a little bit at first. So there's definitely more, I'm going to say, you know, little chunks at the bottom, but not harmful. They're actually, if you feel them, they're gritty. And then anything else that you see that looks really soft and fine, I don't say not sandy so much as like, I guess like ultra fine sand, those would be lees. So that's just spent yeast in there as well.
Yeah, so it's really a sign of both how kind of natural the approach is, as well as that it's hand disgorged. So it's not this perfected process. There was a question about the difference between the 20 and the 19. And so one is, I have definitely noticed more deposit in the 20, yeah. But how else would you compare the two?
So the 19 had a little bit of petite. So it is Malvasia Bianca primarily this year. It's 70% and 30% Muscat Blanc. I think we had those two varietals with like 3% petite mincing in there or something. We essentially had some young baby vines that were coming online and picked them and threw them in the press with these guys. Interestingly, like we don't take much of this one at all. It's done ambient starter, which means we essentially, I put a keg outside in the sun and then we pitch that keg into this lot. And usually that's a slower fermentation for us, but in 20, it was really fast and it actually finished, you know, we bottled quite quickly. And usually this is one of the last things we do. It's always like the last day we're picking this needs to go into bottle and it's like the worst timing ever. This year it was actually quite early and it finished its primary fermentation in bottle quite early as well. And typically they go through malolactic fermentation. So if you think of like a stereotypically like creamy, buttery Chardonnay where you get a little bit more texture, that's typically gone through malolactic fermentation. And typically these do go through in bottle too, just because we're not intervening in any sort of way. They're not sitting with any sort of high sulfur to them. This one didn't, just on its own, it just hasn't gone, it hasn't moved. So there's also a little bit of a different acid profile on it as well. So lower alcohol because the Malvasia doesn't come in really high bricks, so high sugar. We just let it kind of be. But strangely, this is always the one that I call like languishing in bottle where I'm like, is it going to finish? I'm never sure it's going to finish. And this finished probably in, you know, December, which is pretty early for these for the Pet Nats. So
yeah, for me it reads just a lot brighter, zippier, and drier.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Yeah. So let's go ahead and shift to, I promised that I'd keep us on track with Trying to hold to 10 minutes per wine so we can get through them all. If we move to Chardonnay, in some ways, maybe the most classical, most broadly known grape, but here working with a very specific vineyard. Joy, will you take us through your beautiful Chardonnay?
Sure. First of all, Maya, this pet nut is delicious. I'm right now I'm doing my custom crush at Early Mountain, so I get to see this as it sort of evolves in the tank, and I just love how it's finished in the bottle. So thank you so much for sharing that. I love this product. It's really good.
You helped bottle Pet Nat this year too.
I helped you well. So I did help with I helped bottled this one. I don't think I was there for the red day this year, but I think I did this one both last year and this year. So
yeah, I completely forgot that. So thank you, Joy.
No, but it really, one of the great things for me in custom crushing at Early Mountain is I get to learn all your tricks. And so, thank you for teaching me about Pet Nat. So hello everybody. Thanks for the chance to share today. If you don't know, if you don't know anything about my story, I started in the Virginia wine industry working at Michael Schaap's Wineworks, and I was there for about 6 years. And then in 2018, I transitioned to work for the Winemakers Research Exchange. The Research Exchange is basically a group of winemakers. Many of the winemakers in fact, all the winemakers on this call are part of the Winemakers Research Exchange. And it's basically a way for winemakers to do experiments in their own wineries in order to explore new techniques or products or equipment as a way to push innovation forward in the Virginia wine industry. So it's a great honor to be part of that and to be able to be coordinating that project. But when I took that job, I wanted to keep making wine also. And so I had started to make a little bit of wine on the side when I was at Michael Schaap's, and I've kind of continued that project since. And this Chardonnay is the first thing I made after I left that job. And so for me, this is kind of a special one because there were a lot of things to figure out in terms of how to get the wine made when I was no longer attached to a particular winery. And I was just so fortunate to have many friends that came alongside and helped that to happen. So the grapes for this come from the Mount Airy vineyard, which is farmed by Tim and Ben Jordan. So Ben is the winemaker at Early Mountain. Tim now is the full-time farmer at Mount Airy, but he also does a lot of vineyard consulting. And I knew him from my days at Wineworks when he was our vineyard consultant over there. But I still needed a place to make the wine. So the grapes came from Mount Airy, and then Kirsty Harmon very kindly allowed me to use her winemaking equipment and taught me so much in the cellar that year as well. But I think another sort of reason that I wanted to call this Wine Maze, I mean, surely those friends were part of that, but too, there were a lot of folks that were just saying, it's okay if you don't have a home, it's still okay to go ahead and try to make your wine somewhere. And so projects like this, where, Eileen is highlighting side projects, that really means a lot to folks like me that don't really have kind of a driving force vineyard behind us. It really kind of helps us to have a place to share our wines as well. So thank you to Eileen for doing that too. I think in terms of the winemaking, this is probably this is probably the most straightforward winemaking of anything I make. So it's made it's a barrel fermentation in neutral oak barrels. It's only 3 barrels total that were made. 2 of them went through malolactic fermentation and 1 didn't. And we bottled them in July. So within about, 10 or 11 months of making the wine. So.
Awesome. And I'll just say you mentioned Kirsty Harmon hosting you, and she's the winemaker at Blenheim for anyone who doesn't know. So
I want to also say, in the little blurb that you had us do, I sort of mentioned somebody who gave me a kick in the pants and told me that it was okay to just make the wine and figure it out later. And I do want to just publicly acknowledge that was Mathieu Finot. So Mathieu, thank you for giving me the kick in the pants I needed to try to figure out how to make wine on my own.
I don't remember. I say a lot of things sometimes. You should not listen to everything that I'm saying.
Well, you don't remember that, but I do. We were sitting on the porch at Veritas. You had come over for lunch, and I was meeting with Emily that day, and you all were asking, how are you going to make your wine this year? What are you going to make? And I was like, I just don't even know how I'm going to figure it out. And you were like, make the wine, figure out the rest later.
I mean, that's what we do anyway. We just follow an idea and see what we can do with this idea. So it's perfect.
Exactly. It might not be the best business plan, but it certainly was. It certainly made me realize that you don't get a vintage back. You have to make
I
wine
think
every
we do that for passion, not for money. Otherwise, we'll do another job probably.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, awesome. So for the other winemakers who haven't had a chance to jump in yet, you all have all of the wines. So any thoughts on the Pet Nat or the Chardonnay? Rachel, you commented that you love this Chardonnay.
Yeah, this is so I poured it out and then I poured it back in because it's really opening up so much. Yeah, I love it, Troy. Good job.
Thank you. I mean, I feel like honestly, this is Tim Jordan delivered some really wonderful grapes in the middle of a pretty challenging vintage. They were nice, clean grapes, and it gave me a lot to work with. So
that always helps. This is actually the first Joy Ting wine I have personally had because it's so hard to find. So thanks, Eileen, for getting it out there.
Well, Rachel, you've posted now on social media several times being like, this is the wine club I want to be in. And as I said at the beginning, for those of you who joined, I did kind of the classic, what you're not really supposed to do as a marketer, and created something that I wanted to buy. So I'm glad you do too, Rachel.
Yep, definitely.
Any other thoughts on the first two wines?
I have a question for Joy. Were you specifically looking at the valley for Chardonnay fruit?
yes.
Wow.
Yeah. That's a great question, Nate. I think, certainly Chardonnay grows everywhere, right? We have it everywhere from, I guess, in Virginia, mostly from central on north. But I looked to the valley specifically because I think I really like to have a nice acidity to the Chardonnay. And I like to drink my whites pretty acidic anyways. And I think the valley gives a nice acid profile on Chard. I'm not really looking for, a lot of high sugar, high alcohol kind of expression at all. And so it's more the type that I like to drink. And I think kind of a type that goes with whatever we're going to make for dinner tonight. So yeah, I usually look to the valley for Chard because I like that profile. When I was at Wineworks, those were my favorite Chardonnay lots that came in, or the ones that came out of the valley.
I will just jump in and say that the finish on this Chardonnay is like incredibly, incredibly long. Like it just keeps going. And usually for me with Chardonnays that tend to have that really long, dense finish, they tend to be that really kind of alcoholic, rich style of Chardonnay. And this isn't that. It's really bright. It's really vibrant. It's not heavy on the mid palate, but it's crazy because the length is just like forever. It's awesome.
Thank you. I think honestly, again, I think that goes back to the grapes that came in. It was, it was 18 and there was a lot of rain, but Mount Airy didn't get as much rain as we got here in Central. It was third leaf. And so I think there was just a lot of flavor in there, even though it was a rainy year, and we picked pretty early. We picked like end of the third, beginning of the fourth week of August. Basically this was in before I went to Burgundy this year, and this was in before I went to Burgundy. So I think really that was just sort of that. It's a really nice vineyard for Chardonnay because it gives you that balance. So thanks, Sarah.
I just want to pitch in and say how I'm impressed by Maya being able to do a Pet Nat because I know the amount of time that it takes during harvest, and setting up a bottling during harvest, it's the last thing that I would like to do. So I really appreciate that you're doing that because I would never do something like that. But I think it shows very well. So it's, I think a lot of people don't realize how busy we can be during harvest. And on top of that, planning to do a second fermentation from natural yeast fermentation, it's a very, very, very challenging task to do. So it's not an easy wine, even if you claim that it's a low intervention wine. It's a very technical wine to do, and very time sensitive too.
It always has the worst timing possible too. It's always like the last day you're picking, the day that you brought in 18 tons or something. It's like, surprise, you get to stay up till 2 a.m. and do it. And I'm always trying to convince Eileen that we don't need Pet Nat. No one wants Pet Nat. So then we can have it a little bit more like easier. Yet to make that work.
Especially during a pandemic, because generally I get rewarded for my ask for more Pet Nat by coming in on a Saturday with my husband and kids and helping bottle it. because as Maya mentioned and Matthew just said, it's precise. You have to do it at a very certain time, and it doesn't matter what's going on. And so it's usually kind of all hands on deck. Our CEO comes, I come, and when we were keeping everyone separate during the height of COVID during harvest, you guys just had to handle it on your own, and I felt sad that we couldn't come and help out that year.
No, I think this year was so different because it's usually like everyone's like, sure, we'll help because they want to see pet not happen. But I'll actually give my mom credit because I get grumpy really easily, and she was always the one that's like, I'll come in and help, and I'm like, I don't want to do this, and she'd just come in no matter when, and it started with like we would sit on the floor and like fill from a tank. Now we use like a hand bottler. I think we used Matthew's hand bottler at one point even during harvest. I don't even remember at this point, but yeah, so like it's still bottled by hand, but it's just instead of using some sanitized line coming directly from the tank, it goes through this little bottler, so you can hook bottles onto it. And we have a pneumatic capper now that we can, put them on instead of by hand, which you're always like, is
That's
that
my husband's favorite part.
Pardon?
That's my husband Andrew's favorite part. He likes doing the capping.
The capping, yeah, no, it's such a team effort. It's like I'm again always about it. We always have to check it, so we're always running like the residual sugars for it, up until that point. And it's so many people that help with it. So.
Well, Maya, having been there the last couple of years, I'm super impressed with how you get that all organized so that like when it's time to pull the trigger, like you pull out the tape, you have like the way you do it. And I think that's the only way to get it done. But I'm glad that you do it because every year I love your pet nat. So thank you for doing it, even though it's a pain in the middle of harvest.
It doesn't feel organized.
Well, it is.
At the very least, it gives me something legitimate to whine about. So there's that.
I keep asking Nate if we can make more pet nat, and he keeps telling me no because it happens during harvest. He's like, yeah, there's no way.
Nate, call us. We'll be there.
Call Eileen.
Well, awesome. Well, let's switch over. Speaking of team effort, I know everything at Stinson is very much you and Nate, Rachel. You want to jump in and tell us about your rosé?
Sure, just a heads up, my 3-year-old did just walk into the playroom. Oh, okay, she's leaving, we're good. So the Rosé of Tannat, the first year we did that was in 2017. We actually had too much Tannat, which never happens to us. We only have 7 acres under vine, so it's very rare that we have too much of anything. But it happened with the Tannat, and we had kind of been kicking around the idea of trying a rosé with it, because I don't know why, but we just kind of had this theory that it could make a really nice light fruity rosé. So we wanted to try that, and the way we went about was doing a direct press. So basically the way you would make a white wine, rather than giving it some time on the skins, like we do with our other rosé, which is a Rosé Mourvedre. So we did direct press because the grape is so dark. We actually got some nice color in it. And I think the flavors are really interesting, especially when compared with the wine. It's so light. And so you think it's just going to be like really, really light flavor, but then it's so full bodied and fruity and even a little bit tannic, that it's kind of a fun contrast. And then of course the acid is amazing. Tannat has such good acid. So we really don't have to do anything to this wine. Like Joy said, this is a super easy wine. It basically makes itself. All we do is press it and ferment it. And, we really try to pull out the aromatics, but other than that, this wine just kind of makes itself every year. And then it's super popular in the tasting room. It's fun to drink, and it's an unusual rosé varietal. So it's been very successful for us.
That was what I found so interesting about it, is that Tannat, you feel like it's this counterintuitive thing that Rosé of Tannat is the last thing you'd expect. And it's so flavorful and expressive, and especially just that bright pop of intense acidity, intense flavor. so delicious. We love having this rosé in our tasting room as well. We often feature it at Early Mountain.
Yeah.
I love the bright acidity. I think it's tannats always keep this like very bright acid, and you really capture that, and I think that still makes this wine so lively that it's super interesting.
Yeah, that's one thing we're always missing in our rosé of Mourvedre is there's so many things I like about working with Mourvedre, but it really never retains acid, and so we wind up having to throw so much acid at it in the winery, and so it's really nice to be able to work with a varietal that you don't have to acidify.
Are you picking earlier for this in order to keep the alcohol down?
That's our goal. We do, when it's our own fruit, which it usually is, then we have much more control over it. The 2020 is actually all Horton fruit. We got almost completely wiped out at Stinson from the frost. So this is Horton. And we did communicate with them a lot about the harvest parameters we were looking for. But typically at Stinson, we'll kind of segregate a portion of the block that isn't ripening as well, or ripening fairly unevenly, and that will be the rosé portion.
Well, awesome. Well, I saw a lot of people commenting that either they've opened the rosé and tried it or had in past vintages and loved it. I know this is one that I'm definitely holding on to because it's one of my favorite rosés every year.
I mean, I just need to have something more in my cellar anyway, because that's like summer is coming and I need some. So
yeah, this is our summer water rosé.
I would just pipe in and say, I love this rosé because I think you still have a lot of like fruit and floral expression, but you have that nice acidity too. Like, I love the balance of the aromatic expression and the mouthfeel, but with that nice crispness at the end. I really love this expression of it and this application of Tannat. A great idea.
Thanks. Yeah, we were before we started making this, we were doing a little bit of fruit dropping in the Tannat and pressing and using that juice to acidify other wines with, and it was really, really tart, but it was so good too. So we figured if we could kind of tame that a little bit, then that would be something really fun to drink.
Awesome. Well, staying with fun to drink, Matthew, I'm so excited to hear about this Malbec. It's so stunning in the bottle. And when I was making these tiny bottles, there was so much kind of like intensity from the Keller that the clear glass almost had staining inside of it.
yeah, it is weird. I wasn't expecting to get that, to be honest. And I've done some 2020 in the same style, but I don't have the same color. I mean, 2019 was a very specific vintage. Yeah, it is dark. It is inky. There's one thing about the Malbec is, first thing that I will say is, like, we should not be planting Malbec in Virginia. It's a bad idea. It's a super challenging grapes. It's not made for terroir. Like Argentina works very well for Malbec, and you can find a lot of good Malbec in plenty of other places. But Virginia is tough for Malbec. It never ripens the way we want. And I think that's the reason why I decided to make it in a and I quote here, air quote, Beaujolais style. So I've done a carbonic maceration on this wine because again, it's I didn't want to push the ripeness. I wanted to be low alcohol. I wanted to get, I don't know, a glue wine. That's the way I describe it. I'm not sure if glue translates in English, but you know what it means. It's like it's a wine that you want to drink outside during the summer or something. It's a light style wine, low tannin, and easy to drink young. But also my inspiration behind this wine, just to go very, very quickly about it, is I'm a winemaker at King Family Vineyards, and I'm lucky. I've got all the tools that I want over there. I can do a lot of wine in a very classical way. But I really wanted to challenge myself with this vineyard that I'm managing. It's a 5-acre vineyard in Afton on top of the mountain, and I wanted to do something that doesn't need a lot of equipment. So all the wine that I make with the grapes that I grow over there, I make them with no destemmer. I do everything in whole clusters. So that's a carbonic maceration, so that makes sense. That's whole cluster. But that's the idea behind it. The owner of the vineyard that I'm helping is Gilbert Tallard, is another French guy, and he's always been doing this wine in his garage. So he's a true garagist in that sense. And I wanted to continue this idea of garage wine. And I don't know. I mean, I also have a vineyard in France with my brother, and we are we're looking a bit more into the natural wines side of the business. And that's also the reason why I wanted to make this wine with no sulfur, with very little addition. It's all natural yeast and all this kind of thing. So again, it's a very simple wine. It's I don't know how to say. It's not. I don't like to say it's not a serious wine, because every wine is serious. But at the same time, it's a simple wine. It's in the beauty of a simple wine, something that you open up with friends and you had a good time with it, and it's enjoyable very, very easily. Yeah, so I'm not sure if there's anything that you want to know about this wine. Malbec makes very big berries, very soft berries that explode very, very, very easily. And so that's also the reason why I wanted to do a carbonic maceration, because I know it will start getting me some juice and start the fermentation very, very quickly. It's all natural yeast, as I said earlier. But anyway, so.
Are you doing a full carbonic where you're actually kind of sealing the top, or is it kind of a hybrid semi?
No, I'm doing more like the Beaujolais style of carbonic. That's never like with sealing the top and anything like that. In fact, I'm filling up my bean, because I don't have big quantities, but I'm filling up my beans, and then I just at the bottom, I'm squishing the bottom just to get a bit of juice. I'm adding my yeast starter, my natural yeast starter, to start the fermentation. And to be sure that I've got some CO2 that's being produced from underneath, and that's going to fill up my tank with something fermenting at the bottom. I mean, we've talked with Joy and forever about how to do proper carbonic maceration, what the proper techniques and all these kind of things. Without being too technical, I've been taking care of this vineyard since 2016, and that's 2019, and that's the first one that I'm putting in bottles. So just to tell you the level of trial and errors that I've been going through before getting to where I want to be. That the first time was like, oh, that's kind of good enough that I can put it in the bottle. So let's say it this way.
So Mathieu, the only right way is the way that works for your situation, and I think this product gives you. I think this is the right way for this. So I'm thankful you figured it out. This is a lovely Malbec. It still has a lot of really nice Malbec-y character to it.
Yeah, it's still made with Malbec, so it's
I know, but it's
like Malbec, but it's
but like your whole clusters haven't like taken over and made it too carbonic-y. Like it's still really Malbec-y. It's lovely. Yeah.
For this site, has like your farming of that vineyard changed, knowing with like the goal of the wine, or is it just?
No, in fact, I think in the past I was always trying to push this varietal too far in ripening and never getting really where I want it to be. So now I think I'm comfortable harvesting it at low bricks because of the style of wine that I want to do. 2020 is not as dark as this one. They were less colored, was more diluted. But I still think that what I'm going to be bottling soon on 2020 is still like, slightly carbonic-y and slightly Malbec. But it's not as concentrated as this one, but that's the vintage effect. But it just makes my life easier in the vineyard because I know I can harvest this block a little bit earlier.
It's such a lively wine. It's really cool.
Thank you.
What other varieties are you growing in that vineyard with this project?
So I've got a Cap Franc that's of 2019. I'm going to be bottling a Tannat, but not a rosé. I'm sorry, it's just a regular Tannat. and Petit Verdot in 2019. And so again, that's the varietal that I'm working with right now. There's a little bit of Merlot over there also, but I'm using it more as a topping wine than anything else. I don't think it's interesting enough to stand on its own. And it's weird because I do really like Merlot. Usually I'm like, if I could have done a good Merlot over there, I would have done it, but it doesn't show the way I want. So.
And are you doing all of those varieties? Are you doing those all whole cluster with that same technique?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, not with that same technique. The other ones are just like whole cluster fermentation, not carbonic maceration.
Gotcha.
Joy, are you seeing more people doing carbonic in Virginia?
Well, I mean, that's a great question, Sarah. I think that sort of depends on your definition of whole, like the range between whole clusters and carbonic. So I think a lot of people are doing a certain amount of whole cluster inclusion into a destemmed bin or tank. That's pretty common, I think, at this point. I think people that are trying to do things that are like almost all whole cluster, either the way Mathieu's doing that was sort of, squishing on the bottom and getting the fermentation going. That I think there's always, like, in terms of WRE experiments, there's more WRE experiments on whole cluster than any other topic. Just trying to kind of figure out the protocol for that. True carbonic, like putting whole clusters in a tank and gassing it with CO2, not many people are doing that. Tim at Cardinal Point is doing some version of carbonic. Kirsty's been playing with carbonic. I'm not sure. I think there's a couple of other folks out there that are doing true carbonic, but I would say like whole cluster is something that I have more and more people talking to me about and looking at those older, those WRE experiments to say, what are the different protocols that we could use to do that? So I think there is an appeal to that. And Mathieu, you might want to talk a little bit about what you like about that. Even when you have the option for a destemmer, why are you doing whole cluster?
So like, I mean, like on this one, I'm trying to do a carbonic in the more in the sense of like, also the fact that I'm squishing the bottom of the tank at the beginning to get some CO2 going. After, I'm not doing any punch down, I'm not doing anything, and I'm pressing the wine when I'm like, I mean, when the little juice that I've got in the tank is around like, I'm going to be technical here, but 0 Brix or 1 of specific gravity. And the idea is like, I want something light. I don't want to extract any tannin on this wine. So that's the carbonic that I'm looking on this one. On the other wine, I'm doing a whole cluster fermentation. So I'm fermenting with a stem. And when I ferment with a stem, I'm trying to get the tannin out of the stem. So here I'm trying to get a little bit of grainness because I do like grain wine too. It's weird, but anyway. But also trying to get tannin. So I've got different targets depending if I'm trying to do a carbonic maceration like the Malbec or whole cluster fermentation. One of the challenges that we very often run into in Virginia is when we try to do carbonic maceration, we usually try on smaller tanks, smaller vats. And when they work carbonic maceration in Beaujolais, they work in bigger tanks. So you've got the weight of the cluster that's going to squeeze each other. So you're always going to be producing some juice. When you work with small tanks, you don't get this juice extraction naturally. And that's the reason why I'm squishing it a little bit to try to recreate that. So, sorry, super technical, super boring.
Well, and just to give for all of you listening, what these words mean in the glass, semi-carbonic or carbonic are giving a juiciness. They're giving a low tannin fruit extraction. And that's where when Mathieu said glue, glue, or we have a wine soif. Soif means thirst. And so I think of them as wines of thirst. They're low tannin. You can throw a chill on them. You can drink them in the heat of summer. And I'm curious to get all of your feedback. If this is a style of wine that you're drinking more, it's certainly a style I'm drinking more. And throw your bottle in the fridge for half an hour, 45 minutes, and it's just so refreshing and delicious.
I also think like for a long time, like Beaujolais wine, I mean, like I would say 10, 20 years ago, Beaujolais wine had a bad reputation because they were, considered as light and people were looking for like big wine and things like that. And I think the more we go, the more we start to rediscover wine with less alcohol, with yeah, wine that you want to drink with friends that doesn't have to like, you don't have to sit on the table and hold on the table when you're drinking because there's so much tannin that you cannot finish the glass. I think there's something about being very simple and easygoing that work with this wine that is more the trend. I mean, I drink more and more Verde style wine for the same reason, because I think that there's time for everything. So
Yeah, I'd argue that it's not simple. There's a lot of layers in the Malbec. I mean, between the really kind of bright, almost like chalkiness to the acidity, to those layers from the stems, to that little pop of tannin. It's really, really beautiful.
yeah.
So moving
sorry.
Oh, sorry.
One real quick, sorry. I personally love this style of wine too, because I like to drink red wines, but I'm not always having something to eat that really goes with like a big red wine. So I feel like, food friendliness too. It's like this will go with a sort of wider range of whatever I might be making for dinner tonight. And again, that's how we drink most of our wine at home, is when we open a bottle when we start eating dinner. And so I feel like this goes with a wider range of things than some of our bigger red wines do.
Yeah, and I think it goes well with what we can do in Virginia. I mean, it's we have to work with the terroir, you have to work with the grapes, and for me, this combination was working. So
awesome. So moving to our Merlot on the table, the Welshes, if you guys can take us through this wine.
Go ahead.
Absolutely, I'll go. So we are here to talk about the Walsh family wine 2019 Russ Mountain Merlot. So this is a pretty special wine for us. The vineyard is called Russ Mountain, and this is a vineyard site that is located in Northern Virginia along the Blue Ridge Range, a little bit south of Bluemont, Virginia, if you're familiar with the area. We did not plant this vineyard. When I moved up to this area like a dozen years ago to work in wine, I kept tasting Merlots that I really thought were special. And people, I would ask around about these Merlots, and they all came from the same vineyard, and it was called Russ Mountain. And I got excited about it. And then a couple years passed, and I was at an event, and I met somebody, and his last name was Russ. I said, "Do you know anything about? You must know something about this Russ Mountain." He was like, "Yeah, it's my vineyard." So I learned about the site. It's a 4-acre vineyard site. It is 100% Merlot, and it's at a pretty high elevation for our area. It's at about 950 feet, southeast facing, like quite steep slope, and like a very rocky. It's got a lot of what we're looking for Merlot in Virginia, and as a result, Merlot ripens quite well at this site, and you get like a really high-toned, spicy, kind of dense, complex wine out of it. We started making wine from it in 2017, and we were very, very lucky. In 2018, we took over management of the vineyard. So we manage this vineyard now and produce just a vineyard designate Merlot from it. From the 4 acres that we have.
You say it so nonchalantly, like it wasn't like your dream came true.
It was like my dream came true to get this vineyard.
Yeah, truly.
Yeah. So this is the 2019. This is 97% Merlot. There's a little bit of Petit Verdot in it, but primarily this is just kind of showcasing the Merlot from the site. And this tasting is the first time we've actually poured this wine for anybody.
So good.
Yeah, so we're excited to keep farming this site. We grow Merlot at 3 different vineyards, but this is the only actual Merlot that we make. All of the rest, single varietal. All the rest of the Merlot we do goes into Bordeaux style blends, but we always keep the Russ Mountain separate because it's so distinct, in our opinion, at least.
Nate, this wine knocks my socks off. It's so great. Like, I think this is Joy. Like, I think this is the argument for vineyard designating right here. Like, this is the reason you vineyard designate something. It's just lovely.
Yeah, it's,
Thank you, Joy.
this is a vineyard that really taught me more about balance, like intrinsic in a site, than a lot of the other vineyards that we manage. It's as if this little hillside just wants to grow Merlot. It ripens, it grows so much more evenly than the other Merlot. And we grow Merlot in sites that we're very excited about and proud of. But this Merlot is quite well balanced. It requires less input from us. And we get this really expressive, very distinct kind of aromatic and structural style out of it.
I think too, that's something we've been really talking about is sites that seem like they just want to grow things, and how much easier and less stressful it is as producers when you do find that, and like when you get that, how to like lean into that even more.
Yeah, I mean, I think so often we use Merlot as like the sort of base red for a blend and then build other things around it. But we don't think of Merlot as like a quintessential Virginia grape. But I think in some places, and I think this site is a really good example, you can really have some really lovely expression of balanced fruit and structure and acidity and everything all in one place. It just doesn't happen everywhere. So I'm thrilled that you guys have this site and are making this wine. This is lovely.
I also think that Merlot, unfortunately, had very bad press. And I mean, I do grow a lot of Merlot at King Family, and I love Merlot. I think it's great wine because I think Virginia works very well. The Virginia climate works, and the Virginia soil works very well with Merlot. And very often, I think, as a winemaker, I would do much more Merlot if I could. I think the customers, because they've seen Sideways, are a little bit more, on the fence about like, oh no, they're going to tell you they don't like Merlot. But I think that's a perfect example of a non-California Merlot, and that's beautiful because it's balanced, because you can have food with it, because it's not sweet, because there's some nervousness into it. I think it's very well done. And I think your oak profile also, I think Rachel was saying that, but I think you really respect the wine with what you've done with it. So I think it shows very well.
Thanks, Matthew.
So Nate, question for you, or for both of you. To my mind, Cabernet Franc is the red grape that most shows place in Virginia. But would you argue for Merlot, between the two of those grapes, which do you think is more important to kind of bottle on its own, showcase site? Or do you think they both do that well?
That's a very good question.
Hard question.
I think it depends on the site. We conversely to this, we make one Cabernet Franc, and it's a vineyard designate from a site that we farm that showcases Cabernet Franc in a really interesting way. Whereas we also grow Cabernet Franc at vineyards where we end up blending it. So I think, at least for our sites, it depends. It depends on the site. And if,
I think it's up to you as a producer to really be listening to the sites you're farming and paying enough attention to realize it when it happens. I think so often you're like, I got to have Cabernet, I got to have Merlot, I got to have Chardonnay. You're like just trying to check boxes. And I think for us, it's been really important to just like pay attention to everything that's coming in, everything that's growing. And when there are those things that really jump out, and it's, obvious that it's so different and so distinct, like you have to respect that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe another way that I would answer that is I can always, if we were doing this Zoom meeting a month from now with a bunch of barrel sample wines, I could always pick out Russ Mountain, and I could always pick out our Bethany Ridge vineyard. But I might not pick out the difference between one clone of Merlot at Bethany Ridge and one clone of Cab Franc. I might mix those up, admittedly, but I wouldn't mix up what is Bethany Ridge, and I wouldn't mix up what is Russ Mountain. So I think some vineyards just showcase that, and it could be many varieties. In the wide world of Virginia, I think there's just more Cabernet Franc bottlings for people to try to really experience that than there are Merlot bottlings. So I think maybe we don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I mean, I asked the question because I think there's certain varietals like Tannat or Petit Verdot, for example, which do really well in Virginia. But from the standpoint of telling an expression of sight, they're so personality driven that the grape variety, I think site differences aren't quite as distinctive. And for me, as someone who's looking to tell this story of, I don't want to be talking about Virginia 5 years from now. I want to be talking about specific regions and specific vineyards. It's exciting to see an expression like this Merlot that you can just taste the site through it. And Ben and Maya are always trying to convince me to bottle more different things. And I'm always like, no, we don't need those 5 Cabernet Francs maybe. But this definitely shows why bottling it as a unique site is perfect.
Yeah, and I mean, because you all do some vintages, I think Early Mountain is producing like 3 Cabernet Francs.
We're up to 5.
So go for it. I mean, we
No,
kind of
we are.
You know, we created Walsh Family Wine kind of based on the belief that there's people that are interested in that. And that's been our experience. If the wines are interesting and the vineyard sites are interesting, our experience has been at least that like there's people that want us to taste that.
It's not everyone,
yeah,
but there's enough people.
So I say go for it.
Yeah.
I think getting back to the concept of terroir and site is very, very important, because when you got the right site, if you got the right grapes on it, then your life as a winemaker becomes very, very easy, because then you don't have to do anything. You just have to highlight what's coming. And you know, we've been talking about Petit Verdot and Tannat that got maybe a lot of press lately, but I personally think that I'm fighting much less my Merlot and my Cabernet Franc than I'm fighting Tannat and Petit Verdot in the vineyard and in the winery. So, you know, if like my site at Toc Montaigne will be more Cabernet Franc than Merlot, because Merlot doesn't work well for me on that site. But I think every site is different, and you have to see, like you said, like you have to see which one's gonna really work for you. And I'm a true believer in Cab Franc for Virginia. I think it's my favorite grapes to grow. But I think Merlot, if on the right site, is just outstanding. So.
No, well, this is stunning. I think for those in the club, you may have seen the little teaser for October's shipment. We will have a specific block Cabernet Franc as part of it from our good friends at Keswick Vineyards. So we'll be able to talk about some of those specificities of the clone and that specific block at our next tasting. So any other questions for Nate before we move on to the RAH? Nate and Sarah.
Eileen, this has been awesome. I know we have RH to go, but so fun.
It is fun. Well, I was saying, even if nobody joined us tonight, we were all going to be really excited to taste wines together and talk.
Yeah.
I think that's very exciting.
Thank you for joining us tonight, because it's even better.
For the October, those Keswick like block designate wines are like stunning.
So cool, yeah.
So I'm excited for that.
Awesome. All right. Well, Maya, take us home with the RAH.
Okay. Yeah, so this is my side project. So the first one that we were talking about, the Pet Knot, is Early Mountains, and that's who actually employs me. And then this is my little side project. So I started in 2017. It is a dessert wine. It's an Appassimento style dessert wine. So the fruit is dried before being pressed, and it is 75% Petit Manseng and 25% Malvasia Bianca. So the varietal that was in the Pet Knot is the same varietal in here. And this is like that prime year that I mentioned, I way, underestimated the crop we were getting off of Malvasia. So originally this was supposed to be Petit Manseng and Sauvignon Blanc, but the Sauvignon Blanc fell through, and I was like, hey, I kind of screwed up the Malvasia. Maybe I should take that instead. So I did that. It was dried. And what was interesting is, as I was mentioning before, it's like pectin and high protein. When I went to press it, so it was 1 ton and it dried down to probably, by the time I got to the bricks, like 0.4 tons. I got almost no yield off the fruit because there's all that pectin in it, and I wasn't adding anything to like break it down or anything. So just for context, when we press for the pet knot, it's surprisingly gentle, but we still get like about 600 liters per ton off of 1 ton of Malvasia. So this I got, I think it was 120 liters off the Malvasia. So it was a very tiny amount and kind of disappointing. So I had a thought, it's like with the Malvasia portion, let's take some of the juice, pitch it back on the pumice that was pressed, because when you felt it, it still like tasted good. It still had a lot of integrity to it. So I was like, let's try fermenting the pumice on its own with a little bit of juice. And then, I had the portion of the Malvasia that was just direct pressed or post drying. And then meanwhile, the Petit Manseng came in, pretty high sugar on that to begin with. So it wasn't dried very far. And so that was, once it was dried, it was pressed, and then the Malvasia was put on top of that and pressed into a different container. So it ended up being 3 different fermentations. It was originally planned to be a co-ferment between the Malvasia and the Petit Manseng, but just timing wise, that didn't work out. The Malvasia was going drier too quickly. So with the Petit Manseng, also no added yeast. It was all ambient cultures for this, so nothing was added. So it was sitting in barrels, such high sugar. So, I know a few of us have talked about bricks at one point, and just for context, the Petit Manseng was picked at like 27 bricks, and it was dried to 35, and 1 degree bricks is 10 grams per liter sugar. So that's like 350 grams per liter of sugar. So it's pressed, tasted great, very, very sweet. But it didn't start fermenting for over a month, which just drove me nuts, because it's sitting there and you're worried that something has gone horribly wrong, and you keep tasting them and like, well, it hasn't gone to hell. So that's a good sign, but it was just sitting and sitting and sitting. And so finally it starts fermenting. And it fermented for close to like 6 months before it actually just came to a natural stop. And it was probably right around, I think, like 13% alcohol. So it's a pretty decent balance. And you'll notice like on the back of the label, there's some of like the wine chemistry information. So the pH of the picked fruit was actually quite low, but when you dry fruit, you end up getting more potassium out of it. So the final pH is higher, it's 3.8, but it has a high TA too. So the acidity you're getting in the wine is based off the TA, not the pH. So that crazy, skin fermented Malvasia lot that I wasn't sure was actually going to work. And I figured, I had this other little like experimental lot for, and I was like, well, I can just use that for that, if this doesn't work out. It ended up being my favorite portion of the Malvasia. So it got this like really interesting kind of baking spice character. And I didn't expect that at all. And it kind of stuck with it through the life of the fermentation and into aging. So this was bottled in 2019. Oh, I should say it was all fermented just in neutral French barrels. So not really exciting there, but it's 2017, bottled in 19. And the first place I ever actually poured it was at Walsh Family. So I thought that was kind of cool and fun. So they do a cool program where they host visiting winemakers and say, bring your projects, bring your wines. And I think I brought a pet knot and the RAH. So yeah, but I know I'm low on time and I don't want to keep everybody, but that's kind of the quick and dirty on the RAH.
Well, thank you. And I know Maya won't say this, so I will. This wine was selected for the governor's case this year. So at the governor's cup tasting, this was one of the 12 top wines in the state. So of 600 or so wines. So pretty amazing accomplishment. And when we heard the news, I had to remind her that she'd promised me 20 cases of it for the club.
That went without saying. I was pretty excited about this club when you told me about it from the get-go. So,
well, Maya, I have to say you are both brave and patient. For like, there's something about just that waiting for that thing to start and just being brave enough to let it do that. And I just love how it turned out, and I love how the Malvasia like lifts the Petit Manseng. Like, sometimes that Petit Manseng can just be all so much. And I think the Malvasia really, really lifts it. So thank you for your courage and your patience. And waiting.
There was so much crying. You have no idea. I was like, I ruined it. It was horrible.
I can't imagine. But I'm so glad it turned out like this. And it worth your patience was rewarded, right?
Hopefully. I still remember that going like, that was scary. But
Maya, I don't think I ever asked you, but like, what's RAH stand for?
So it's actually my grandmother's initials. So
Okay.
I kept coming back to like, I didn't know what to name it. And, you know, I remember Ben kept harassing me. It's like, you should, you know, what are you gonna name it? What are you gonna name it? Because I already like bought the bottle and I'm like, I don't know. And I kept coming back to her initials because she and I were really close and she had passed away some years ago. And I was kind of like, I'm gonna go with that. You know, it's meaningful, you know, it's a little strange, I realize, but it's, you know, it's special. So
That's a good talking point too, anyway. And I honestly, I do love the simplicity of the label. I think it's perfect.
thank you. Yeah. Someone told me it looked like a fake label once.
You know, it's simple and it's just what you need on the label, and everything is in the glass. So that's all what you need. You don't need to do more.
Well, thank you.
Maya, are there any other wines under this label now?
Yep. So there is a 19 version of the series one. So I skipped 18. It was such a wet vintage. By the time I would dry the fruit, I figured there'd be basically no yield. So that was a little prohibitive there. But so there is a 19 vintage. And then in 20, no dessert wine, but I have like two different wines I was giving a whirl. So one is Chenin Blanc and the other is a Petit Manseng Chenin Blanc co-ferment. So we'll see how those go.
Dessert style or dry?
So they're dry for the most part. I mean, there's like a small bit of RS left on it. But yeah, so I think right now, I think they're gonna be in barrel for quite a while, especially the co-ferment, because the acidity is pretty, like, I love acid and I'm like, it's a little much. So that's gonna have a little bit of lees time to it. So I'm on the fence whether or not to do some of the Chenin Blanc as a sparkling too. I keep going back and forth. I don't know. I think now that we're in this like sparkling health we're all talking about before we got on this call, like, I don't know, but you know, so that's possibly on the table. But right now there's the co-ferment and then the dry as well. So
Good, thank you.
Well, awesome. Well, folks, jump in with any other questions you have on any of the wines, or if you've opened things, if you have questions about what to pair them with, or if you're planning to open, you know, don't hesitate to email me. The email for the club is tov@earlymountain.com, and I can pass along any messages to any of the winemakers. Just to give you a quick preview, I included this in your most recent email, but we have a pretty stunning lineup in October. We'll have the Blenheim Albarino, Lightwell Survey, which is one of Ben Jordan's side projects, his Hinterman, which is a Petit Manseng-led blend. We'll have a funky orange wine from Early Mountain that's been kicking around in the winery since 2017, right? Yep. We have a single block wine from Keswick, Walsh's What Will the Women Drink, which is one of my favorite stories and labels out there, as well as a very delicious, full-bodied, over-the-top red, and a vermouth from Rosemont Vineyards down in Southern Virginia. So pretty awesome lineup. And this has been a ton of fun and wonderful to see all of you and taste together. Hopefully in October, we can get together in person, and more to come. But don't hesitate to reach out with any questions, and thank you everyone for your time and expertise.
Thank you, Eileen, for putting this together. This was
Thanks for having us.
This was a lot of fun.
Awesome.
thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Awesome. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.